Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Before we begin, please like and subscribe to my channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Real estate photography seemed like easy money. Drive around, take pictures of properties, edit them, send them to agents. Most of the time it was boring. Empty houses, overgrown yards, the occasional nice view. Then I got the call about the Wickham property. It's been on the market for 2 years, the agent Sandra told me. We need fresh photos. Maybe a different angle will help sell it. The property was in Redfield Township, 40 minutes from anything resembling civilization. When I pulled up the long driveway, I understood why it hadn't sold. The farmhouse was in decent shape, but the land felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. Like the earth itself was holding its breath. Behind the house stood a barn. It was massive, at least 3 stories tall, with weathered red paint and a black roof. But something about it immediately struck me as odd. There were no doors. I walked around the entire structure. No main doors, no side entrances, not even a hayloft opening. Just solid walls with a few small windows near the top, too high and too small for anyone to climb through. I called Sandra. How am I supposed to photograph the barn's interior? There's no way in. Just get exterior shots, she said. The previous owners said it was sealed up because of structural issues. Not safe to enter. I took my exterior shots, but my curiosity was eating at me. I walked closer to the barn, examining the walls. The wood was old but solid, and I couldn't see any seams or filled-in doorways. It was like the barn had been built without any entrances. Then I heard it. A sound from inside. Rhythmic, like footsteps, but too heavy. And with each step I felt a slight vibration in the ground. I pressed my ear against the wall. The footsteps stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then something hit the wall from the inside, hard enough to make me stumble backward. And again. And again. Each impact felt like something massive was throwing itself against the wood. I ran to my car and drove straight back to town. I told Sandra I had the exterior shots, and that was all she was getting. She seemed disappointed but didn't push it. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the barn. No doors, no way in or out. So what was making those sounds? I did some research and found old records for the Wickham property. The barn was built in 1887 by a man named Josiah Wickham. According to a digitized newspaper article from 1889, Josiah had sealed the barn after his wife and daughter disappeared. He told neighbors that something was inside, something he needed to contain. The article mentioned that Josiah died a year later. They found him sitting in front of the barn, facing it, with an axe in his hands. He'd been dead for days, but he was still sitting upright, like he'd been standing guard. I found another article from 1923. A new family had bought the property and tried to demolish the barn. 3 workers started breaking through the wall with sledgehammers. According to witnesses, as soon as they made a hole large enough to see through, all 3 men stopped working, dropped their tools, and walked away without saying a word. They left town that same day and never came back. The barn was never touched again. Against my better judgment, I drove back to the property the next day. I told myself I just wanted one more shot, a better angle of the barn for my portfolio. But really, I needed to know. The barn looked the same, standing silent under the afternoon sun. I circled it again, camera in hand, looking for anything I might have missed. That's when I noticed the windows near the top. They were boarded up from the inside. I found a ladder in the overgrown equipment shed and leaned it against the barn. My hands were shaking as I climbed. At the top, I could just reach one of the windows. The boards inside were old, and one had a gap wide enough to see through. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it through the crack. The interior was completely empty. No equipment, nothing. Just a vast hollow space that seemed to go down farther than it should. The light from my phone didn't reach the bottom. Then I saw movement. Something large, pale, and wrong was climbing up the wall toward my window. It moved like a spider, but it was the size of a person. As it got closer, I realized it wasn't climbing, it was growing, stretching upward, reaching for the window. I scrambled down the ladder so fast I nearly fell. The ladder clattered to the ground as I ran to my car. Before I drove away, I looked back at the barn. In the window, I saw a face pressed against the glass. A woman's face, pale and desperate, mouth open in a silent scream. Then another face appeared beside it, a child's face. They weren't outside looking in. They were inside looking out. and behind them in the darkness of the barn I saw more faces. Dozens of them all pressed against that small window, all trying to see out, to be seen. I drove away and never went back. I deleted all the photos I'd taken and told Sandra I couldn't complete the job. She wasn't happy, but she paid me for what I'd done and found another photographer. 3 weeks later, that photographer called me. She'd heard I'd been to the Wickham property and wanted to know if I'd noticed anything strange about the barn. "Did you hear anything inside?" she asked, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "What did you hear?" "Screaming," she whispered. When I got close to it, I heard people screaming from inside. Men, women, children, all screaming to be let out. She hung up before I could respond. The Wickham property was taken off the market after that. I heard through the real estate gossip network that Sandra had visited the property herself to see what the problem was. She spent 10 minutes walking around the barn, then got in her car and withdrew the listing immediately. When someone asked her why, she said only, "Some places should never be sold. Some doors should never be opened. I think about that barn sometimes, about what's inside, about why Josiah Wickham sealed it with no way in or out, about all those faces I saw in the window. And I think about what it means that the barn has no doors, but somehow over the decades, it's been filling up with people. Where did they come from? Where did they go in? Maybe the barn doesn't need doors. Maybe it has its own way of taking what it wants. Maybe it opens from the inside, just a crack, just enough to pull someone through before sealing shut again. Last I heard, the property still stands empty. The house is falling apart now, but the barn looks exactly the same as it did in 1887. Strong, solid, sealed, and if you drive by at night, people say you can see lights in those small windows near the top. Flashlights, maybe, or phone lights. People trapped inside, still trying to signal for help, still hoping someone will find a way to let them out, but there are no doors. There never were, and I think that's exactly the way it was meant to be. I should have never taken that farmhand job in Millbrook County, but college debt doesn't pay itself, and Mrs. Pemberton was offering $300 a week just to help with her corn harvest. Easy money, I thought. The farm sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by fields that stretched so far they seemed to touch the clouds. Mrs. Pemberton was a widow in her 70s, kind but quiet. She showed me around on my first day, the barn, the equipment shed, and the fields. That's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the east field was a scarecrow. Nothing unusual about that, right? Except this one looked too real. It wore actual clothes, faded jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. Its face was a burlap sack with holes cut for eyes, but something about those empty holes made my stomach turn. "Don't mind old Gregory," Mrs. Pemberton said, noticing me staring. "Been there since my husband passed. He built it the week before he died." "Gregory, you named your scarecrow." She smiled sadly. "That's what Harold called it. Said it would watch over the crops when he couldn't anymore." The first week went by without incident. I'd arrive at dawn, work until the sun began setting, then head back to my apartment in town. The pay was good, the work was honest, and I was starting to think this would be the easiest job I'd ever had. Then came the night I had to stay late. A storm was rolling in, and Mrs. Pemberton asked if I could help secure the equipment. By the time we finished, darkness had swallowed the farm. My truck was parked near the east field, and I had to walk past old Gregory to reach it. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of corn stalks that whispered in the wind. When the light hit old Gregory, I froze. The scarecrow was facing the wrong direction. That morning it had been facing east toward the rising sun. Now it was turned toward the house. Toward me, just the wind, I muttered, forcing my feet to move. Just the stupid wind. But there was no wind strong enough to rotate a scarecrow on its post. I walked faster, my flashlight beam bouncing with each step. "Don't look back," I told myself. "Just get to the truck," but I couldn't help it. I glanced over my shoulder. Old Gregory was closer, not by much, maybe 10 feet, but it was definitely closer than before. My heart hammered against my ribs. I broke into a jog, then a run. Behind me, I heard it. The rustle of straw, the scrape of boots against dirt. I didn't look back again. I reached my truck, fumbled with the keys, and threw myself inside. As I started the engine, my headlights swept across the field. Old Gregory stood right at the edge of the gravel road, one arm extended toward my truck. In the glow of my headlights, I could see something that made my blood run cold. The burlap face had changed. Someone had drawn a smile on it. A wide, crooked smile. I slammed the gas pedal and didn't stop until I reached town. The next morning, I called Mrs. Pemberton and quit. I didn't tell her why. How could I? She'd think I was crazy. She tried to convince me to come back, said she'd give me a bonus, but I refused. 2 weeks later, I saw her obituary in the local paper. Heart attack, it said. They found her in the East Field, collapsed near the irrigation system. But there was one detail that made me put down the newspaper with shaking hands. According to the article, she was found at dawn lying at the feet of the scarecrow. And according to her neighbor, who discovered her, old Gregory was wearing something it hadn't worn before, Mrs. Pemberton's husband's wedding ring, the same ring she'd told me she kept on her nightstand, because she couldn't bear to bury it with him. I never went back to Millbrook County. Sometimes late at night I think about that scarecrow standing in the field. I think about its empty burlap eyes and that crooked smile. And I wonder if it's still standing there, or if it's learned to walk even farther than the edge of the road. I wonder if one day, it'll walk all the way to town. To this day, I refuse to drive past any cornfield after dark. And if I see a scarecrow, no matter how harmless it looks, I turn around and find another route. Because I know the truth now. Some scarecrows aren't meant to scare away crows. They're meant to scare away people who ask too many questions. And if you're not careful, if you linger too long in their fields, they'll make sure you never leave at all. My uncle's property in Sutton Valley seemed like the perfect place to clear my head after the divorce. 40 acres of woods, a small cabin, and complete isolation. No cell service, no internet, no reminders of my failed marriage. Just me and nature. The cabin was rustic but comfortable. Uncle Ray had warned me about the well before he handed over the keys. "Don't use it," he'd said, his expression serious. "Use the bottled water I left. The well water's not safe." I'd nodded, thinking he meant it was contaminated or something. I didn't think much of it until my third night there. I was sitting on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the darkness when I heard it, a voice faint and distant, like someone calling from far away. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the old stone well, about 50 yards into the tree line. "Help!" I sat up straight, my beer forgotten. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Help me, please." I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the well. The structure was ancient, built from stacked stones and covered with a wooden lid. As I approached, the voice grew louder. "Down here. I'm down here." My hand touched the wooden lid. It was ice cold despite the warm summer night. I pulled it aside and the smell hit me immediately. Damp earth, rot, and something else I couldn't identify. I shined my flashlight down. The well was deep, maybe 40 feet. The water at the bottom was black and still, but I could swear I saw movement, ripples disturbing the surface. "Hello?" I called down. "Pull me up," the voice responded. It sounded young, female. "Please, I've been down here so long. I'm so cold." Every instinct told me to walk away, but what if someone was actually trapped? I looked around for rope and found a coil hanging on a nearby tree. It looked old, but it would have to do. "I'm going to lower a rope," I shouted. "Grab on and I'll pull you up." I tied one end to a sturdy oak and lowered the other into the well. The rope went slack when it hit the water. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rope jerked tight, nearly pulling me forward. "I've got it," the voice called, but now it sounded different, deeper, wrong. I began to pull hand over hand. The rope was heavy, far heavier than a person should be. My arms burned with the effort, but I kept going. As I pulled, I heard something else, a wet, dragging sound like something being scraped against stone. When the top of a head appeared over the edge of the well, I stopped pulling. Now, it wasn't a person. The thing that emerged was vaguely human-shaped, but its skin was gray and bloated, covered in moss and slime. Its eyes were milky white, and its mouth hung open, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. Water poured from its mouth and nose as it dragged itself onto the stone edge. I dropped the rope and stumbled backward. The creature smiled at me, stretching its rotted lips impossibly wide. "Thank you," it gurgled. "So hungry." I ran. Behind me, I heard it flop onto the ground with a wet slap. Then the sound of it crawling, moving faster than something dead should move. I didn't look back. I reached the cabin, slammed the door, and locked every window and bolt. All night I heard it circling the cabin, scratching at the walls, tapping on the windows. That voice, now clearly inhuman, called to me. "Let me in. I'm so hungry. Been waiting so long." At dawn, the sounds stopped. I waited until noon before I dared to look outside. The creature was gone, but I could see the trail it had left. A wet, slimy path leading from the well to my porch, then back into the woods. I packed my car in 10 minutes and left. I called Uncle Ray from the first place I got cell service. "You opened the well, didn't you?" he said quietly. "I told you not to use it. What the hell was that thing?" He was silent for a long moment. "My grandfather sealed that well in 1952, said something fell in during a storm, and when he went to check on it the next day, the thing that climbed out wasn't what fell in. He pushed it back down and covered the well. Made me promise to never remove the lid. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me?" He had a point. Did it get inside?" "No." "Good. It can't come in unless you invite it. Just don't go back there for a while. It'll return to the well eventually." "They always do." I never went back to the cabin. Uncle Ray sold the property a year later to some developer from out of state. I sometimes wonder if they found the well, if they opened it, if they heard that voice calling from the darkness. And I wonder if they were smart enough to leave the lid closed. Last month, I saw a news article about Sutton Valley. A family of 4 had gone missing from a newly built vacation home. The police found their car parked outside, all their belongings still inside, but no sign of the family. The article mentioned they'd been staying on Hargrove Road, near an old abandoned property. I didn't need to read more to know which property they meant. Some wells aren't meant to give water. They're meant to keep things in, and once you let them out, they're always hungry. Always waiting, always calling. I thought house sitting for the Merricks would be easy money. A week alone on their farm in Oak Ridge Hills, feeding their chickens and watering their garden while they visited their daughter in Denver. $200 a day plus free room and board. What could go wrong? The farmhouse was beautiful. A restored 1890s Victorian with a wraparound porch and views of rolling pastures. The Merricks gave me a tour before they left, showed me where everything was, and handed me a list of simple instructions. "One more thing," Mr. Merrick said as they were about to drive away. "If you see lights in the back pasture at night, don't go investigate. Just close the curtains and ignore them. Lights? Like from ATV riders or something?" Mrs. Merrick and her husband exchanged a glance. "Something like that," she said. "Just don't go out there after dark." Promises, I promised, though I thought it was a strange request. The first 2 nights were peaceful. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets and woke to roosters crowing. It was the kind of quiet that city people dream about. Then came the 3rd night. I was in the living room reading when I noticed a glow coming through the back windows. I walked over and pulled aside the curtain. In the far pasture, maybe 200 yards from the house, were lights. 3 of them hovering about 6 feet off the ground, moving in slow circles. They looked like lanterns, but brighter. The light they gave off was cold and white, nothing like the warm glow of a flame. As I watched, they began to move closer to the house, gliding smoothly across the grass. I remembered Mr. Merrick's warning and dropped the curtain. But curiosity got the better of me. I cracked it open just an inch and kept watching. The lights moved in perfect synchronization, like they were connected by invisible strings. When they reached the fence line, about 50 yards from the house, they stopped. For a full minute, they hovered there, pulsing slightly. Then they began to move again, but this time they were coming toward the house. My heart started racing. I stepped back from the window, then heard something that made my blood run cold. Knocking. 3 deliberate knocks on the back door. I stood frozen in the living room. The knocking came again, the same rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I crept toward the kitchen, where I could see the back door. Through the window, I saw one of the lights hovering right outside. "Hello?" a voice called. It sounded like a young woman. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" Everything in my body screamed not to answer, but the voice sounded so genuine, so desperate. "Please," the voice continued. "My car broke down on the road. I just need to use a phone." I walked closer to the door. Through the window, I could see what looked like a person standing in the glow of the light. A woman in a white dress, her face in shadow. My hand reached for the doorknob. Then I noticed something that made me jerk my hand back. The woman wasn't casting a shadow. Even with the bright light behind her, there was no shadow on the ground. "I know you're in there," the voice said. And now it sounded different, flatter. "Let me in." The other two lights appeared on either side of the first one. The knocking started again, but now it was coming from multiple doors. The back door, the side door, even the front door. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I backed away into the center of the living room, my phone in my hand. No signal, of course. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. The knocking stopped. For a moment I thought they'd given up. Then I heard a scraping sound above my head. They were on the roof. Footsteps walked across the ceiling, slow and deliberate. They stopped directly above me. I heard a tapping sound, like something testing the roof tiles, looking for a way in. I remembered the Merricks had a basement. I ran to the door, flew down the stairs, and locked the basement door behind me. The small windows were at ground level, and I could see the lights moving around the house, searching. I spent the entire night in that basement, listening to the sounds above me. The scraping, the knocking, the footsteps. Once I heard that voice again, calling my name, even though I'd never told it my name. At dawn, everything went quiet. I waited another hour before I dared to go upstairs. The house was empty, the doors still locked. But when I looked out at the back pasture, I saw something that made me pack my bags immediately. 3 circles of dead grass, each about 6 feet wide, marked where the lights had first appeared. The grass wasn't just dead, it was gone, burned away to bare earth. And in the center of each circle was a symbol, scorched into the ground. 3 interlocking spirals. I called the Merricks and told them I had a family emergency. I didn't mention the lights. What could I say? They cut their trip short and came home. When they arrived, they walked out to the pasture and stared at the burned circles for a long time. "They usually only come once a month," Mrs. Merrick said quietly. "We've never seen them leave marks before." "What are they?" I asked. She shook her head. "We don't know. They've been appearing since we bought this place 5 years ago. The previous owners didn't mention them, but after we moved in, we found journals in the attic. This has been happening for over a century. Different families, same lights. Why do you stay? Where would we go?" Mr. Merrick said. "This is our home. Besides, they can't come in, not unless you invite them. I left that day and never went back. But sometimes when I'm driving through the countryside at night and I see strange lights in distant fields, I remember the Merrick's farm. I remember those 3 cold white lights and the voice that knew my name, and I remember the one rule they gave me: don't investigate the lights. I should have just closed the curtains." My cousin Derek inherited his grandfather's farm in Willowbrook, and he asked me to help him clean it out before putting it on the market. The place had been abandoned for 3 years, since Old Man Patterson died, and Derek wanted to see what could be salvaged. "Easy weekend job," he'd said. "We'll split whatever we make from selling the equipment." The farm was in rough shape. The house needed serious work. The barn was leaning and weeds had taken over most of the fields. But the real eyesore was the grain silo, a massive concrete cylinder that loomed over the property like a tombstone. "I'm not going in there," Derek said immediately. "Grandpa always said to stay out of the silo, said it wasn't safe." We spent the first day clearing out the barn and the equipment shed. As the sun started setting, Derek headed back to his hotel in town, but I decided to stay in the farmhouse. No point paying for a room when there was a perfectly good bed here. Big mistake. Around midnight, I woke to a sound. A low humming, almost like machinery, but deeper. More organic. It seemed to be coming from outside. I got out of bed and looked out the window. The silo's door was open. I was certain it had been locked earlier. Derek had tried the padlock and it wouldn't budge. Now the metal door stood wide open, and that humming sound was definitely coming from inside. I should have stayed in bed. Should have pulled the covers over my head and waited for morning. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The night was cloudless, the moon bright enough to cast shadows. As I approached the silo, the humming grew louder. It wasn't just a sound. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, in my bones. The door was old and rusted, hanging open on squealing hinges. I shined my flashlight inside. The interior was empty, the concrete walls stained with years of grain dust and moisture. A metal ladder led up to a platform near the top, about 30 feet up. The humming was definitely coming from inside. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed strangely, like the silo was much larger than it appeared. The humming stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, rattling breaths that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I backed away from the door, but before I could turn and run, I saw movement at the top of the ladder. Something was climbing down. Something that moved wrong. Its limbs bending at angles that made my stomach turn. I ran. Behind me, I heard it drop from the ladder with a wet thud. Then the slap, slap, slap of appendages hitting concrete as it gave chase. I didn't look back. I reached the farmhouse, slammed the door, and locked every entrance I could find. For hours I heard it circling the house, scratching at the doors, tapping on windows. That humming started again, vibrating through the walls, making my teeth ache. At one point it spoke. The voice was wrong, like multiple voices layered on top of each other, speaking in slightly different rhythms. "Come back," it said. "We're not finished. Come back to the silo." I hid in the bathroom, the only room without windows, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, the sound stopped. I packed my things and drove straight to Derek's hotel. "We're not going back," I told him. "Sell the place as is. I don't care about the money." Derek must have seen something in my face because he didn't argue, but he did tell me something that made everything worse. "Grandpa didn't die peacefully," he said. "They found him in his truck at the end of the driveway. Heart attack, they said. But the weird thing was, he'd been trying to leave. The truck was pointed away from the house, and his foot was still on the gas pedal. Like he was running from something. We sold the farm to a developer for half its value. Derek was happy to be rid of it. I never told him what I saw that night. How could I? 6 months later, I saw a news story that made my hands shake. The developer had started demolishing the old structures to build new houses. When they began taking down the silo, they found something inside: bones. Lots of them. Human bones, animal bones, all piled in a cavity hidden behind a false wall. The oldest bones were estimated to be over 80 years old. The article said the police were investigating, but I knew they'd never figure it out. How could they? How could anyone explain that some places are wrong? That some structures aren't meant to hold grain, but something else entirely. I drive past Willowbrook sometimes. They built a nice subdivision where the farm used to be. Families with kids, people living their normal lives. But they left the silo's foundation. It's a concrete circle in the ground now, filled with gravel and landscaping. Sometimes at night, I wonder if those new homeowners hear anything strange. A low humming that makes their bones vibrate. Scratching sounds that seem to come from underground. I wonder if they know that some things can't be demolished. They can only be contained. And I wonder what will happen the day that containment fails. I took the job as a rural mail carrier because I needed the benefits and the hours worked with my class schedule. The route covered 50 miles of back roads in Thornhill County, delivering to farms and homesteads scattered across the hills. My supervisor, Janet, gave me one specific instruction on my first day. If you see fog at Miller's Crossing, turn around and skip those deliveries. Don't ask why. Just turn around. Miller's Crossing was a stretch of road that cut through a valley between two hills. 5 families lived out that way, and normally I'd deliver to them around noon right in the middle of my route. For 3 months I never saw any fog. Then came October. I was heading down the road toward Miller's Crossing when I noticed it, a wall of white fog thick as cotton completely obscuring the road ahead. It wasn't normal fog. It had hard edges, like it had been poured into the valley and couldn't escape. I remembered Janet's warning and put the truck in reverse. But then I saw the mailboxes, 5 of them, lined up at the edge of the fog. I could just pull up, drop the mail and leave. I wouldn't even need to enter the fog. I pulled forward slowly. As I got closer, I realized something was off. The fog wasn't moving. Real fog drifts and swirls, but this hung perfectly still like a curtain. And it was absolutely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. I reached the first mailbox and put the truck in park. As I sorted through the mail, I happened to glance into my rearview mirror. Someone was standing in the fog behind my truck. I jerked around, but I couldn't see clearly through the truck's back window. I grabbed the mail and jumped out, ready to ask if they needed help. The words died in my throat. The figure stood about 20 feet away, right at the edge of the fog. It was shaped like a person but wrong, too tall, too thin, with arms that hung down past where knees should be, its head tilted at an angle like it was studying me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. It took one step forward and I saw its face, or lack of one. Where features should be, there was only smooth grey skin. I scrambled back into the truck and hit the gas. In my mirror, I saw the figure take another step, then another. It was following me, but slowly, like it had all the time in the world. I sped down the road, putting distance between myself and Miller's Crossing. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely steer. When I finally looked back, the fog was gone. The valley was clear, bathed in afternoon sunlight. Back at the post office, I told Janet what I'd seen. She didn't look surprised. "You went into the fog?" "No, I just got close to it." "I know what you saw," she interrupted. "Everyone who ignores the warning sees them. The figures. They come out of the fog. What are they?" She shook her head. "No one knows. They've been appearing at Miller's Crossing for as long as anyone can remember. Usually just fog, but sometimes the figures show up. They never leave the valley, though. As long as you don't go in, you're safe." "What happens if you go in?" Janet's expression darkened. "We had a carrier who did about 10 years ago. Young guy didn't believe the stories. Drove right into the fog to prove it was nothing. We found his truck 3 days later, parked in the middle of the crossing. Engine was still running, radio still on. But he was gone. Did they ever find him? No, but sometimes when the fog comes, people say they see him, standing with the other figures. Watching the road. I finished my route that day, but I had to skip Miller's Crossing. The 5 families who lived out there called to complain about their missing mail. I felt bad, but not bad enough to go back. A week later, on a clear, sunny day, I delivered to Miller's Crossing without incident. The families were friendly, apologetic about complaining. One elderly woman even offered me cookies. "We understand about the fog," she said. "We never go out when it comes either. We just stay inside and wait for it to pass." "How often does it happen?" She thought for a moment. "Once, maybe twice a month. It usually lasts a few hours. Been happening since before I was born. My grandmother used to say the valley is thin, whatever that means. Said sometimes things from the other side leak through. I kept that job for another 6 months, then transferred to a city route. I told everyone it was for the better pay, but really, I just couldn't handle the anxiety of approaching Miller's Crossing every day, wondering if this would be the day the fog returned. Last month I heard they found another mail truck abandoned at Miller's Crossing. New carrier didn't believe the warnings. They found the truck with the door open, mail scattered across the seats but no sign of the driver. The police searched for 3 days. On the 3rd day, fog rolled into the valley. When it cleared, they say they saw something standing in the middle of the road. Something tall and thin with no face, wearing a postal uniform. They called off the search after that. I don't deliver mail anymore. I work in an office now, far from any countryside roads, but sometimes when I see fog rolling in, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. And I remember that faceless figure standing at the edge of that impossible fog, taking one slow step toward me. I remember, and I'm grateful I drove away when I did, because I know deep down that if I'd taken just one step into that fog, I'd still be there, standing with the others, waiting for the next person who doesn't believe the warnings, waiting forever in the valley where the world grows thin. I worked for the county electric company for 6 years before I quit last month. The job was fine. Good pay, decent benefits, mostly routine maintenance. Then I got assigned to Blackwood Road. My supervisor, Tom, pulled me aside before I left. "There's a telephone pole at mile marker 7. Number 247, don't touch it. Don't work on it. If there's a problem with it, call me directly. What's wrong with it? Just don't touch it." Blackwood Road was a lonely stretch of country road that wound through dense forest. Not many houses, maybe a dozen scattered over 15 miles. The work order was simple. Check the poles for storm damage after the previous night's wind. Everything was fine until I reached mile marker 7. Pole 247 stood at a bend in the road, right where the forest grew thickest. Unlike the other poles, this one was old, really old. While the others were modern treated lumber with clean lines and metal fixtures, this one was weathered wood, dark with age, with old ceramic insulators that hadn't been used in decades. The strange part? The wires didn't connect to anything. They ran to the pole attached to the insulators, then stopped. They didn't continue to the next pole. They just ended there, hanging loose in the air. I parked my truck and walked closer. As I approached, I felt something, a vibration, like a low electrical hum, but I felt it in my teeth, my bones. The air around the pole seemed heavier somehow. I pulled out my voltage detector, even though Tom had told me not to touch it. The meter went crazy, fluctuating wildly between 0 and numbers that shouldn't be possible without serious voltage. But there were no power lines actively connected to the pole. That's when I noticed the carvings. All around the base of the pole, carved into the wood, were symbols. Not graffiti or random scratches, deliberate symbols that looked old, like they'd been there since the pole was installed. Circles within circles, strange geometric patterns, words in a language I didn't recognize. I took out my phone to snap a picture. The moment the camera pointed at the pole, my phone died. Just shut off completely, even though it had been at 70% battery. I was trying to restart it when I heard the sound. A voice, faint and staticky, like it was coming from an old radio. But there was no radio nearby. The sound was coming from the pole itself. I pressed my ear against the wood, multiple voices all talking at once, overlapping like dozens of phone conversations happening simultaneously. I couldn't make out individual words, just fragments. Can't find the road. Been driving for hours. Something's following. I jerked away from the pole. My truck's radio suddenly blared to life, even though I'd turned it off. Static at first, then voices, the same overlapping conversations I'd heard from the pole. I ran to the truck and turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. The voices from the radio grew louder, more desperate, and now I could hear something else underneath them, screaming. I got out of the truck and started walking. Behind me, I heard my truck's horn start honking on its own, a desperate rhythmic pattern. Then it stopped and the forest went silent, too silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. I walked faster. The road seemed longer than it should be, stretching ahead of me endlessly. I kept passing the same trees, the same landmarks. After 20 minutes of walking, I should have been miles from pole 247. Instead, I was right back at it. I tried again, walking in the opposite direction. Same result. No matter which way I went, I ended up back at the pole. It was like the road had folded in on itself, creating a loop with the pole at its center. The sun was setting. I did not want to be here after dark. I pulled out my phone, it had mysteriously turned back on, and called Tom. The call connected, but all I heard was static and those overlapping voices. "Tom," I shouted. "I'm stuck at pole 247. The static cleared for a moment and I heard Tom's voice, distant and distorted. "Told you not to touch it. Can't help you. Have to find your own way out." The call died. I tried again, but my phone wouldn't connect. The voices from the pole were getting louder. I could make out phrases now. "Let me out. I want to go home. Please, someone help me." I realized with horror what I was hearing. These weren't just random voices. They were people who'd gotten trapped here, like me. People who'd stopped at pole 247 and never left. As darkness fell, I saw lights approaching from both directions. Headlights, but the vehicles never reached me. They'd get close, then fade away like ghosts. I could hear engines, see the lights, but they never arrived. I sat down on the roadside trying to think. There had to be a way out. Tom had implied others had escaped. "Find your own way out," he'd said. I looked at the pole again, really looked at it. The wires that ended in mid-air, they were pointing. Not hanging straight down, but angling slightly, like they were being pulled in a specific direction. Into the forest I'd been trying to escape using the road. But maybe the road was the trap. I stood up and walked directly into the forest, perpendicular to the road in the direction the wires pointed. The trees were thick, and branches grabbed at my clothes, but I pushed through. Behind me, the voices from the pole grew frantic, shouting, begging me to come back. I kept walking. The forest seemed endless, darker than it should be. My phone's flashlight barely penetrated the gloom. But I didn't stop. I walked for what felt like hours. Then suddenly I broke through the tree line. I was standing on a road, but not Blackwood Road. This was Highway 17, the main road, 2 miles from where I'd been. My truck was parked on the shoulder, right where I was standing. I checked the mileage. I'd somehow driven 2 miles without remembering it. My work order clipboard was on the seat, with a note in Tom's handwriting. 247 cannot be serviced. Do not stop. Do not approach. The note had been there all along. I just hadn't seen it. I drove straight back to the county office. Tom was waiting for me, looking relieved. "You made it out," he said. "What is that thing?" He shook his head. "Old infrastructure. Some things get installed and can't be removed. That pole's been there since 1923. Every few years, someone doesn't listen and gets trapped. Most find their way out. Some don't. What happens to the ones who don't?" Tom didn't answer. He just handed me a new work order. "Different route tomorrow. We don't service Blackwood Road anymore. We just leave it alone." I quit the next week. I couldn't keep working knowing that pole was out there, knowing people were trapped in those voices still calling for help. Sometimes, late at night, my phone will ring with no number showing. When I answer, I hear static and those overlapping voices. They're fainter now, more distant, but they're still there. Still trapped at mile marker 7, walking the same stretch of road forever, trying to find their way out. And sometimes I wonder if I really escaped at all, or if I'm still walking through that forest, and everything since has just been a dream. The pole is feeding me while my voice joins the others, calling out from the wires, warning the next person who doesn't listen, warning them not to touch pole 247.